Hi everyone and welcome to Beyond Tomorrow, a new series from the New Zealand Herald in partnership with MYOB, where we tackle the unprecedented business environment affecting thousands of small and medium-sized enterprises across New Zealand as the world battles to slow the spread of the novel coronavirus. I'm Will Trafford, and today we're missing Ingrid Cronin-Knight, MYOB's country manager. However, we do have another fantastic and topical guest joining us, MYOB's Head of Employee Services, Felicity Brown, and also Jason Ennor, co-founder and CEO of MyHR. So you might have guessed it already. Today we are talking about employment, all the gory stuff, like letting people go, sure, but also how to manage your staff as they work remotely, keep them motivated and passionate at a time that you might be asking them to take pay cuts, unpaid leave, all this kind of stuff. Jason, it can't be an easy time for you, I'm guessing. Give me some optimism.
Yeah, it's challenging, no doubt. We're working incredibly long hours to look after the 800 or so clients around New Zealand that we care for, and they've got collectively about 17,000 employees. So it's fair to say it started pretty pessimistically, but the impact of the wage subsidy has meant that a lot of employers who were otherwise considering cuts have been able to stop and pause and take a breath and reconsider. I do think there's a delay. I think we will still see some impact, but I think the breathing room has given us some space to reset business, give companies the opportunity maybe not to panic. And there's nothing worse than a panic restructure. You know, you need to take time to consider what your future looks like before diving in.
Felicity, your job's to kind of be optimistic as well, right? Because on the one hand, you're dealing with the HR employee services at MYOB, but MYOB as a company is sort of providing constant support for small and medium-sized enterprises as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, what I would add to Jason's comments as well, I think at the moment, when we talk about perhaps finding the positive, what we are seeing is more organisations starting to look at how they can truly make working from home much more sustainable. And so I think that there have been organisations that have, for various reasons, held off really moving to a more flexible working environment, and this unfortunately has forced them to do so, but they've started to find ways that they can be much more sustainable operating in this way. And so I think that, you know, if we are looking for positives, that can be one for many organisations. This has forced them to look at how they can do things differently. And so that's going to be quite a change, I think, when we start to look at returning to work, what our new normal means. So many people that haven't had the opportunity to work flexibly now have to work flexibly. And what does it mean when lockdown is eventually over, when that is, what that means? And, you know, employers really need to start looking at how they change their environment and their expectations longer term and really create something that's more sustainable when we talk about working flexibly.
One of the first notes I've got here in terms of navigating this new work environment, we should note, we'll talk about all the layoffs and all that other stuff later, but let's try and start optimistically. Communication.
Absolutely critical. I think it's important to recognise that we're week 3, aren't we? Heading soon into week 4. And so communication has been critical throughout. I think in those first couple of weeks, perhaps what we thought would work, maybe we're learning it doesn't, or we need to dial things up, dial it down a little bit. Perhaps for some of our team members, the first few days, what they thought was going well, the way they're setting themselves up, the type of rhythms they're getting themselves into with their teams, perhaps it was going well for the first couple of weeks. So I think now is probably a really good time to check in and make sure that the regularity you've got in terms of your team catch-ups, your one-to-ones with your team members, that those things are still working and meeting the needs for everyone. We know that the environment's going to change this week again for many of those parents who are working from home. And so, you know, perhaps 2 weeks ago when a 9 o'clock morning meeting with the team might have worked really well and everyone was able to dial in at that time, you know, maybe that needs to change again to suit people's situation. So I don't think there's a one size fits all, but I think really regular communication is critical.
Yeah, Jason, I mean, we've got some notes here around tech tools that you can use potentially, like Zoom to sort of set tasks in the morning, maybe have a morning meeting and have one-on-ones and then group Zooms as well to sort of foster that team building and sort of that project sort of oriented, delivering on all those projects and stuff like that. I wonder, are we finding a different type of leadership style works better now that we're all working from home, or what are the tips to be one of these leaders that performs well working from home?
I think some of the fundamentals remain, around leading by example, and sticking to being clear on kind of vision, values, all of the things that make a good leader a good leader. Consistency of behaviour that supports the things you say. Those things exist in a virtual environment and a real environment. I think, to Felicity's point, rhythm is key. Establish some routine and rhythm, probably more so in the remote environment than in the physical environment, because your opportunities to bump into people, or pop out to lunch and grab some sushi, they're all gone. So fixed sort of a daily stand-up or connect is really, really important. And we are talking, of course, about those people that are working from home, but don't forget, a massive chunk of the New Zealand workforce right now is at home and just receiving the wage subsidy. So I think 1.3 million workers are getting the subsidy, and of that, a big chunk are not actually undertaking any work. So don't exclude them from your catch-ups, right? They're all waiting anxiously to see what's going to happen as the lockdown ends. So tech is important, and whether it's, I'm not here to plug any one service, so whether it's Zoom or Skype or Hangouts, a kind of group chat forum is great. Your micro teams, so maybe a daily stand-up or connect with the small groups that work in specific areas. And then there's nothing quite like a work drinks. The rhythm, the regularity, and the use of technology are critical.
Felicity, I wonder if there's sort of Jason raised that really good point, right? The amount of people who are taking the wage subsidy and they're at home, right? There must be a real opportunity for a lot of employers to look at ideas around upskilling and stuff like that, right? Like bring people in and say, let's build you until we can bring you back into the workforce.
Yeah, I think we've spoken to a number of people where learning and development has been quite a focus at this point in time. So if there's been a bit of a downturn in demand for particular roles, now is the opportunity to look at, is there upskilling in terms of what are some of the future skills we could be helping these people to learn at the moment. So it is a really good opportunity. Again, if we're looking for the positives, a really good opportunity to be upskilling with an eye on the future in terms of some of those future skills that we're looking for.
Must be a major sort of duty of care, I suppose, as well, Jason, around these things like mental health, right? I've talked to, colleagues and that kind of thing around this notion of just, maybe the group korero that you have in the kitchen or something like that in the morning, that for some people, if you're single and you're home and your bubble is basically you, maybe your family's in another country, the mental health thing is got to be huge too.
Yeah, well, it really is, and we're seeing a lot of that. I think if you can still afford, in a lockdown, no revenue environment or reduced revenue environment, if you can still afford to offer a counselling service to your staff, now is more critical than ever. If you can't share the tools that are available to get help, free help that's available. But this is where I think those daily connections are really, really critical, because you miss all of the physical signs. You miss the kind of person who pops off to the toilet every couple of minutes because they're really and clearly struggling. That stuff's not visible to you. You don't catch the person in the kitchen who's clearly just been crying over something. You're not with your people, and people's tendency is often to bottle that stuff up. So I think your daily connect helps a lot, and then having tools available to people and reminding people that this is a thing. Even if you think your workforce is okay, talk about it, and perhaps talk about it more openly than you otherwise might. Make it part of your weekly catch-up. Hey, how's everyone going? How are you feeling? This is tough. This is my experience this week. I found this challenge, or I was upset about this thing, or I got this message from a good friend who's sick or been laid off, and share some of your experience. And I think it opens the emotional connection.
Yeah, look, I absolutely agree. I think that transparency and empathy is so critical, and that's why the role that leaders play and the leadership that we see from so many people is so critical at the moment. And perhaps what's really important as well is not making assumptions around people's circumstances. It might be easy to think that someone working on their own at home doesn't have any other distractions and they're fine, but then you forget, well, what must that be like for someone if they do live on their own in a small apartment? They don't get the chance to interact outside their bubble. Those are all the sorts of things that it's really important to make sure we don't make assumptions about, and, you know, you really are in those daily checkups.
One of the other things that we're always talking about as well, and throughout this whole series, is performance and efficiency, and essentially getting the best out of your employees, I guess, while they're working from home. One of the things I guess that it must be very hard to do is, in many situations, you are going to be asking your staff to do a lot more for less. Potentially they're doing things like unpaid leave, they're taking pay cuts and this sort of thing. How do you keep everyone motivated?
I think certainly the way we've been handling this is really transparency of communication is key, and this idea that we are all in this together. It's very different when an employer goes out and says to their staff, look, we've made some bad decisions, some bad investments, we're not making money, I'm going to have to cut your pay or reduce your hours or make you redundant. And there's this natural sort of resentment to management at that point, that there's been some poor decision made that's affected their livelihood. Whereas this is not that. And sharing that and being open about it and going, hey, here's how it is. We applied for the wage subsidy because we had to demonstrate a 30% drop in revenue. In fact, it's been 80%. So that looks like this for us. And we're a bit freaked out, but we're doing everything we can to keep this thing together. We're passing you the wage money. We want to talk about what this looks like. And if we can make it work, we can bounce out of this and be better for it. And I'm asking you to help me here and be honest about directors' salaries, pay cuts for directors, board members who are no longer taking remuneration. You know, this is not a sort of us versus them scenario. Everyone is taking a hit in a big way. And I think transparency around what that means, and then therefore some collaboration around a solution, is key.
I guess another big part as well, Felicity, providing feedback, right, on performance, be it positive or negative. Motivate people by telling them very openly and honestly how they're doing.
Yeah, and look, perhaps to some of Jason's comments earlier around some of the fundamentals still don't change whether you're virtual or whether you're face-to-face, in terms of clarity of expectation, providing real examples so people can understand, clarity of outcomes. So again, that regular communication around what's expected of you, what challenges you're facing, and again, no assumptions, making no assumptions around how people are going. I think it's reasonable to expect that there is certainly impacts to productivity, and that can be out of people's control, right? So we need to be really conscious of that for the most part, we trust that people are doing their very best under the circumstances. But those fundamentals around clarity of expectations, and dealing with concerns around performance really early on. So in the same way that you would face-to-face, virtually, you want to have those conversations really early on. Ideally, it is over, Teams, Skype, Slack, whatever it may be, calls, not emails or messaging, because you need to be able to look someone in the eye when you're having, those difficult conversations. So honesty, transparency, real clarity early on is just as important virtually as it is face-to-face as well.
Jason, you alluded to it before, this notion that eventually that government subsidy runs out right at 12 weeks, and that might mean some really tough decisions, particularly around head count and sort of upending roles. How do you sort of decide who should go and when?
Yeah, I think, again, because of the uniqueness of this time, there's an expected recovery. What's unclear is how long that will take. But I think when I advise anyone going into a restructure, the first thing I ask them to do is look at that sort of future state. Often people build their new organisation based on what's right in front of them, and they lose sight of sort of where they're going as a business. If there is an opportunity to recover in, say, 3 to 6 months, you may be able to have a really open discussion with your team about ongoing wage or hours reductions and go, hey, look, if everyone just went to 3 or 4 days a week, would a 20 or 40% reduction in take-home pay be acceptable to you? Your base salary is the same, but there's a pro rata reduction based on a few less hours. And as the work comes in and as our revenue builds up, we can look to building you back up. And if there's agreement with that, that may be one way of tackling it. The process, and to Felicity's point, the process around restructure and letting people go has not changed, and there is no sort of free kick or procedural sort of shortcuts you can take as a result of COVID. So if you simply can't get past the fact you have to downsize, you must consult in the same way that you always did. You must present a solid commercial justification, and you must follow those steps that allow a person to present their views, to be heard, to seek advice and representation. But as with any restructure, good planning and some foresight will really help going into it, because then you can share all the options that are on the table and maybe avoid layoffs. And look, for some people, reducing take-home pay by 40% just won't work. But provided you're not kind of compelling or trying to force people to disadvantage themselves, you're presenting options, I think collaboration will go a long way.
How do you decide if you've got a team of 3 people who should go? It can't just be performance, can it?
As you're working through your process, if you've got 3 people performing exactly the same role and you're needing to reduce that, whether it's reducing it down to 2 or 1, ultimately you need to make a decision around what your selection criteria is. And performance absolutely can be one of the key criteria that you select based on. But you need to be really clear, transparent around what that selection criteria is. And yes, performance can be one of those, but there can be other things that are involved in that criteria, as long as that's being applied consistently to everyone throughout that selection process. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fair and objective criteria, and it has to be transparent. So you must share your selection criteria with all of the, in this example, 3 affected employees, so they know the basis on which you're making your decision.
One of the things we always talk about with this series is pivoting your business and looking at new potential ways to do business based on, potentially the drop down to level 3, changes in the economy, all this kind of stuff. How within your rights are you to ask an employee to change their role pretty materially?
You're still consulting with someone. So it's not a unilateral decision that an employer can make. You absolutely put a proposal to them. Perhaps if there is a new role that you're proposing they move into, then you're still working through a consultation process in the way that you would even with large scale restructures. So you put the proposal forward, you give them the opportunity to consider that, ask questions, provide feedback, and then based on that feedback, you're then making a final decision around that proposal and whether you proceed with the role. So you can't unilaterally significantly change someone's role. You can absolutely consult with them, and based on the consultation process, the feedback that you've received, then make a decision around whether you're planning to change the role. And ultimately, if it's not a role that a person is capable of, has the right skills for, is wanting to make a change to, then ultimately they would be redundant in their role.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think that last point's really interesting if we go back to what we were saying earlier about this opportunity to retrain and upskill. Because of the reasons driving such a restructure and the need for a business to therefore pivot and change, all I would say to employers is you might consider the retraining opportunities a little more generously than you otherwise would. So to say, well, look, we're going from a sort of bricks and mortar distribution type retail business to a purely online business, and therefore these skills are no longer needed and you're redundant. You might say, well, actually, we believe you've got some capabilities and attributes that would suit this new environment. There's an upskilling kind of program needed, but we're prepared to invest a bit in that to get you there. Again, because decisions are being made on the basis of this massive kind of macro impact, not on the basis of poor business planning. So, to keep good people connected, retraining into this newly pivoted organisation will retain good people and build a lot of loyalty. The best way to recruit in a tough market is not to have to, because you've already got your good people locked in.
I bet especially when you're in a market where skilled professionals are sort of running a bit loose, or tight, I should say, on the ground, I suppose, right? Like if you're in a sector where staff are, still really going to be sought after, you're still going to have to, you're not going to be able to sort of treat your staff a great deal worse, I want to say, than you might have had to have been when you're in a more competitive environment, I guess.
Yeah, no way. And I think people who do are very short-sighted. And look, that old school style of management is good, still exists, but it is slowly kind of moving on. Employers generally are a lot better now at I think, connecting with and respecting their people. And this sort of authoritarian approach has proven not to work so well. Because it does go back to a bit of transparency. Like, there's no way you should enter a meeting going, well, it's this or I lay you off. So, you should be grateful, because that's just awful. But you can't avoid the fact that for some businesses, that is kind of the reality. So, I don't mean to, sound glib or trite about this, but it's that message, but it's just delivered a little bit differently. But again, that's where collaboration and transparency helps. It's like, look, mate, we've been talking about this for the last 3 months. We haven't really recovered. We're still in a bit of a hole. Revenue's tight. I've got a plan. Here's how it looks. And I'm keen to see if you're going to be on board with this plan or not. And if you're not, well, then we can talk about what an exit looks like. And so there's an element of ultimatum there that can't be avoided. But how you deliver it is really the mark of a decent sort of leader and a decent human, I think.
Treating people with respect and dignity are two of the most important things that you need to keep in mind in any of these conversations that people may find themselves having to have, and demonstrating empathy for the situation that they find themselves in as well.
100%. Tough times can unfortunately bring out the worst in people, but this is when a real leader comes to the fore. It should always bring out the best in a good leader. It is the role of the leader to maintain that level no matter how tough it gets.
Is now the time, if you're looking at doing a number of these layoffs, that you sort of call in a consultant to help you out. If you've never done this before, there'll be a lot of SMEs out there who've just never laid someone off before.
As with anything, if you are unsure, then you should seek professional advice. And I think Felicity and I both as HR professionals see this a lot. People will immediately go to an accountant to get tax advice because the IRD are kind of scary, but will often DIY their employment processes and muck them up along the way. The cost of getting it wrong, both not just in terms of cash, but in terms then of time and reputation and your ability to recover faster, can be so significant versus the cost of just paying someone to help you do it. Highly recommend. If you're unsure, get some help. Don't assume you can just wing it.
It's been really good for both of your help. MYOB's Head of Employee Services, Felicity Brown, and Jason Ennor, co-founder and CEO of MyHR. I think that's a cloud app if you want to check that out. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was great.
Really helpful advice. Remember, we want your questions as well. Email them through to video@nzherald.co.nz. It's a tough time, but we're sort of crowdsourcing help together through this product, and that's something that makes me really happy to be involved with it, I guess. We'll have breaking news throughout the day at nzherald.co.nz as well. I'll be here on Facebook Live. Bye for now.